large size organizations to Office 365. Some of you here may also be familiar with the tool called the Transporter. The Transporter tool is for migrating to BPOS. This is not the Transporter tool. This is an online tool for migrating Exchange on-premise to Office 365. It's meant for small and medium-sized businesses. Okay? I'll take all questions at the end, and also please use the mic so that we can record your questions. Thank you. Here's how I've classified this talk. Briefly, we'll go over the migration space. I'll give you an overview of what a deployment plan is. We'll understand the stages of a deployment plan. We'll understand what influences a deployment plan. We'll also look at what are the choices of migration tools we have today. And then we'll see how these factors influence the choices of migration tools. At the end, I will give you a demo of how to create a deployment plan. And then we'll look at two migration tools, the cutover Exchange migration and stage Exchange migration. We'll look at what the admin experience is. We'll look at what the end user experience is. We'll look at the commandlets used, and we'll also see the impact to mail flow. Then we'll spend some time looking at some of the troubleshooting scenarios. Knowing these troubleshooting issues that up ahead will help you a long way in your migrations. These are common issues that I have seen customers encounter during migration. Then we'll finally look at what the end user experience is post-migration. What does the user in your organization need to do after the migration has been completed? And finally, I'll briefly show you what we do and we do not migrate, and we'll end this talk. All right? So let's get started. The first step in any migration is to create a deployment plan. All deployment plans consist broadly of 4 stages: the plan, the prepare, the migrate, and finally, decommission. Once you have a deployment plan, you will know which migration solution to employ. What are the factors that affect the deployment plan? Well, I think there are 5 factors in my opinion, and I'll show you in the next slide. And the individual steps in the deployment plan are affected by the choices you make in those 5 factors. So what are these factors? And Jim talked about these factors yesterday as well. And these 5 factors are, first one is a source server. The source server from which you migrate affects largely the tool that you will use. Are you migrating from Exchange? Are you migrating from some third-party IMAP server? Do you want high-fidelity migrations from, say, Lotus Notes or Google, in which case you will have to use some third-party tool? Are you a small, medium, or a large-size organization? This also affects the migration solution. What identity management solution do you want to deploy? Do you want a single sign-on? Do you want to maintain all your users in the cloud? And each one of these choices have their own trade-offs. But once you do make the choice, it will affect your deployment plan and ultimately your migration solution. And finally, do you want to employ a hybrid deployment or not? Here, hybrid, I mean, is some mailboxes on-premise and some in the cloud. And what provisioning solution do you want to employ? So some of these factors directly influence, and some of them are indirect influences. Now, we looked at these 5 factors. Let's look at what are the migration solutions available. Well, we have broadly classified the migration solutions into 2 categories. One is hybrid, another one is migration. The hybrid is for, general rule of thumb, it is for large organizations, and it's for migrating from Exchange to Office 365. Migration solutions are meant for more for small and medium and for IMAP migrations. We have 3 solutions there. One is the IMAP migration solution, the cutover Exchange migration solution, and the stage Exchange migration solution. As a part of this talk, we will cover 2 of these solutions: cutover Exchange migration and staged Exchange migration. If you have any questions on IMAP migrations, I can take this at the end of this talk. Now, we looked at factors that affect the deployment plan. We looked at the migration solutions. So how do you pick a migration solution? So let me try rationalizing the space using 3 of these factors. And then we'll go create a deployment plan, which will help you solve these problems automatically. Every organization, as the size increases, the time to migrate increases. Say in one end of the spectrum, where you have small organizations with about 150 users, you can migrate over a weekend or even less than a week. But as the size increases to a few thousand users to several thousand, the time for migration increases from several weeks to several months. As the time to migrate increases, the need for features between the cloud and on-premise increases. Because at this time, you have some mailboxes in the on-premise and some mailboxes in the cloud. So when you want these mails to be sent between these users, you want Mailflow obviously to work, you want GalSync to work, and you may want more features to work as well, like FreeBusy, archive in the cloud, and so on. So these are the requirements that come about based on the amount of time it takes to migrate to the cloud. So now, what are the solutions we have? For Exchange, we have 3 solutions, as I noted earlier. We have the cutover Exchange migration, which is meant for small businesses which want to migrate over a weekend or over a week to the cloud. We have stage Exchange migration, where you can migrate in phases. You can migrate a few users to the cloud over a period of time. But ultimately, in a few weeks, say in 2 to 3 weeks, you expect all your users to be in the cloud. And finally, you have the hybrid migration, which is what Jim Lucy gave a talk yesterday about, which is about establishing a hybrid deployment and migrating over several months to years to the cloud. So now that we have looked at all this, can look very daunting. However, I think we made it easy for you to be able to create a deployment plan. So I'm going to switch to Office 365 and create a deployment plan live. All right? All right. So I'm going to sign in to show of hands, how many have an Office 365 tenant already? OK, so some of you are familiar with it. So here I'm on the Office 365 portal. I'm going to sign in as a tenant admin. I have already created an account, organization here. So I'm going to sign in. I'm the tenant admin for this organization called exmig5.info. So I'm going to sign in with my tenant admin password. Once I sign in, I am now brought to the admin page. In the admin page, there are a few shortcuts. These admin shortcuts are common activities that an admin does. Below the admin shortcuts, there are links to the various Exchange control panels, various control panels, Exchange, Lync, and SharePoint. But if you move to the left-hand side of the screen, you will see an admin overview panel, which has got various topics. The first one being setup. In setup, you have a link called the custom deployment. For this demo, we're going to click on this link and create a deployment. On clicking this link, you get 2 choices, whether to create a pilot or to create a deployment. I'm going to create a deployment. For this demo, let's pretend we're going to migrate a small business, which is about 10 mailboxes, to Office 365. And we're going to maintain all these users in the cloud, and it's going to be a cutover. We're going to migrate them all at one shot over a weekend. So it's like a weekend migration project. OK? So I'm going to click Next. And then the first question I'm asked is, what do I want to create a deployment plan for? And in this case, I'm going to choose Exchange Online, I'm not going to create a deployment plan for the other workloads. The first question I'm asked in the wizard is what source server I'm migrating from. You will observe that as I'm going through this wizard, the questions that will be asked will correspond very similar to the factors that I was talking about. The first question is, are you migrating from 2007 or 2003? Or what source server? And in this case, I'm going to select Exchange 2010. The next question is, what is your migration type? We are given two choices. Is it migration or coexistence? Coexistence is also called as hybrid. We are going through a name change, and it was formerly known as coexistence, and we are rebranding it as hybrid.
Could you go back one screen? What are the options that are right below that?
So some of these things are going to be cleaned up for the GA by the GA timeframe. The options that are going to be here by GA timeframe are these. One is Exchange. Are you going to migrate from Exchange? Otherwise, are you going to migrate from IMAP? And the third option is it some other third party? When you click on the other third party, we'll navigate you to some web page where we'll have a list of third parties, and that's it. That's what we'll support at GA timeframe. We're going to clean these up. So it's not very clear, but it'll be done by that timeframe. Okay? The next one is whether it's coexistence or migration. And here, for this purposes, I'm going to do migration because we're not doing hybrid deployment. And then I'm asked whether do you want to migrate phased or all at once. And you see in this deployment plan, we have also explanations on what each of these mean. You have the pros and cons for each one of these choices that you make. And in this case, it's a small organization with just 10 mailboxes, and I want to migrate all at once to the cloud. So I'm going to choose the all at once option and then click next. Then I'm asked what identity management solution I want. Well, I said in the beginning that I don't want to deploy AD in my environment. I don't want to maintain users on-premise. I'm going to maintain all the users in the cloud. And so that's the choice, and that's the third option. And I'm going to click that. Finally, it gives me a summary of the options that I picked. What is the deployment plan? What was the source server I'm migrating from? What is the migration type? So on and so forth. When I click Finish, I get a series of steps. And these series of steps is what you must follow to accomplish your migration. It tells you how to prepare your on-premise or on cloud. It tells you how to start migrating. It tells you when to start doing the redirections and so on and so forth. Okay? So this is the deployment plan. So don't worry about the details on the various steps. I'm going to go through them for each of the Exchange migration solutions in my deck. The key takeaway I want you to have from this demo is that we can create deployment plans in Office 365, and that should be your first step in your migration planning. All right? OK, thank you. Let's switch back over. So to summarize, till now we've looked at how to create what is a deployment plan, what are the factors in a deployment plan, what are the choices of migration tools, and finally we looked at how to create a deployment plan. For now, for this rest of this talk, we'll focus on two migration solutions, the cutover migration and stage migration. And I'll do a demo for the cutover migration, and we'll migrate live into production as a part of this talk. Okay? The cutover migration, as I previously mentioned, is for migrating small businesses to Office 365. There is no on-premise deployment required. We can migrate from Exchange 2003 server and above. We can also migrate from on-premises and from hosted systems, as long as they are Exchange. We not only do migration, we also do provisioning. So we also create the users, groups, and contacts in the cloud from your on-premises. It's a high-fidelity migration. We migrate not only mail, and we migrate calendar, contacts, et cetera. And I'll go through the details of those in the later part of this talk. However, there are some requirements you need to meet. One, you have to have Outlook Anywhere service enabled on-premise. You have to have, your organization needs to be less than 1,000 people in size. and you have to maintain your identity in the cloud. Okay? Now, let's look at what you need to do with cutover Exchange migration in the various phases of your deployment plan. Let's start with planning. What do you do in planning? Well, read some case studies. By GA timeframe, we'll have some case studies which will document the current customer experiences. Read them and understand their pains and what problems they've gone through. Read documentation on help.outlook.com. There's good documentation for each one of these tools. I would strongly recommend read. Then decide, when you have decided that you want to kick off these migrations, first go create a deployment plan, the plan that I went through as a part of this demo. Notice at this point, all your mail is still flowing through your on-premise organization. Next phase is to prepare. What do you do in preparation? Well, you have to prepare in two places. One is in the cloud and one on-premise. In the cloud, you have to go do your domain verification. You have to prove that you own that domain, whichever you are migrating from. In on-premise, as I said, you have to get your Outlook Anywhere service up and running. Ensure that it's configured with a CA-issued cert, trusted CA-issued cert. Finally, you can use, how many of you are familiar with Test Exchange connectivity? Show of hands. Okay, fairly. So that's a good tool. It's a web-based tool which you can go to, testexchangeconnectivity.com, and test your connectivity with Outlook Anywhere. And I'll show you some slides about it later in the part of this talk. And then finally, migrate using either the domain administrator or create the appropriate permissions for these users. Okay? The next phase, once you have prepared your on-premise environment, the next phase is migration. Now let's go do a demo of the migration before I talk about the various stages of the migration. Since migration is a long-running process, I want to kick it off early so that as we do the talk, the migration can proceed, and we can go look at what has happened in terms of progress later. Okay? So let's go do a live migration demo. So I'm going to migrate from a small business, which has got about 10 mailboxes, not much data, about 35 to 40 megs of data, to Office 365 production. Okay? Today I looked at the data center where I'm migrating to, and there are about 20 orgs that are currently using this tool migrating right now. So we're going to be one of those orgs migrating as a part of this demo. Okay? So I'm going to go back to my deployment plan, and I'm going to navigate to start migrating mailboxes now. This takes me to the ECP, Exchange Control Panel, in Office 365. And I'm navigated directly to this migration tab. This migration dashboard will enable me to kick off my migrations. Notice the number of clicks I'm going to go through in kicking off the migration. Okay? Number one, I'm going to click New, which is to create a new migration. And in the later part of this deck, after I finish this live migration, I'll show you what happened underneath the covers and its impact to the various users and mail flow. So now we have three options when I click New. Do I want to migrate from Exchange? The first two options are about Exchange. And the third option is IMAP. And in the first two options, the first one is about, do I want to use Autodiscover to migrate, to discover my source server? I'm going to say yes. I want to use Autodiscover because I cannot remember my source server address. Now, the second screen is about connection settings. What is the credential I need to use? So in this case, I'm going to use the domain administrator. And then finally, I have an option that says, what is the max number of mailboxes that I want to use? So I'm going to come back to this property later in the later part of the talk, but I'll talk about performance a bit. But notice this property. This will tell you, this dictates how many mailboxes you want to simultaneously migrate. You can set it up to 10. And I'm going to click Next. So there was 1, 2 clicks now. At this moment, it's running some checks to make sure and discover my on-premise server. And hopefully it succeeds. So there you go. It's successful. It's discovered 10 mailboxes, 1 group, and 1 contact. I'm also going to, it also allows me an option to register some user. So I'm going to say browse. This user will get a notification at the completion of the initial phase of the migration. So once we have copied all of the data, it'll send an email notification to this user. So I'm going to send it to myself. I hope I selected myself. I'm going to kick off run. At this point, I have kicked off the migration. It took me just 4 clicks to kick off a migration from the on-premise to Office 365. Now the dashboard has refreshed, and the dashboard has 2 parts. The email migration is an overview of what has happened after initial copy, and the top part is about what is happening right now. It's about the active migration that I just kicked off right now. I'll go over it in detail in the deck, so I just wanted you to get a feel of this dashboard. That's pretty much it. You can also get an view of the migration from commandlet. So I can run 2 of these commandlets. Get migration status. And this gives me the overall status of the migration, which is the things that have happened after the first phase. At this time, there is nothing much that has happened at the first phase because we are at the first phase. And get migration batch. And this get migration batch will give you all the data of the current migration. It gives you things like total count, the number of users that are scheduled for migration. It gives you the completed count, the number of users that are currently being migrated. So remember, we also do provisioning. So it's currently at the provisioning phase, creating all these users and groups. So now this will go on for some time. So let's go back to the talk, and we'll come back to it whenever we can see some progress. Right? All right. So now, till now we have kicked off the migration. The migration is happening. Now let's look at what's really happening underneath the covers. The migration phase for cutover has 6 phases. Migration stage has 6 phases. The 3 phases are driven by the tenant admin, and 3 are driven by the migration service itself. So we start with the provisioning. We go into initial sync. We go into incremental sync. We finally switch the users over to Office 365, and then give them licenses. In brief. Now let me go over each one of these stages and look at what the dashboard experience is, which we already looked in the demo, what the underlying commandlets that are being called, and then finally we look at what the mail flow experience is and what the end user experience is. What we just did in the demo is we clicked new, we created new, we chose the auto discover option. And underneath the cover, and entered all the connection settings. And then what happened is there was some long process that was happening. We were trying to discover the on-premise server. So underneath the covers, we called a commandlet called test migration server availability. And we passed all these settings that we gave in connection settings to this commandlet. And this went and located the on-premise server and made sure it was there. Upon successful return, we navigated to the next page where we used NSPI to go discover the set of users on-premise. We automatically discover. You did not have to enter any user information, the set of users on-premise. We automatically discovered, and then we called a new commandlet called new migration batch. And we said the option is exchange, and we passed a bunch of configuration and created this batch. A new migration batch was created. We still didn't kick off the migration. If you look on the right-hand side, the mail is still flowing to your on-premise server. And there is users are still connected to your on-premise server. Next, to kick off the migration, we click on the Run button. Once we click on Run, we call the Start Migration Batch commandlet. Once we kick off the Start Migration Batch commandlet, the underlying migration service starts creating the users, groups, and contacts. That's the first phase of the migration, provisioning. In the next phase is where we start copying the data, which is called the initial sync. We start copying all the data for once into the Office 365. During initial sync, if you wanted to monitor progress, you can, of course, use the migration dashboard, the one we saw during the demo. The migration dashboard, as I previously mentioned, has two sections. The email migration section, which gives you a status of what happened after the initial sync. Once initial sync is complete, you look at this part of the dashboard to understand what's going on. To look at things that are happening in initial sync, you look at the active migrations dashboard to get a sense of what's going on. In the active migration dashboard, we have the following things. We have the requested count. The requested count tells us how many users were requested to be migrated in this batch, which we didn't have to explicitly go specify the users. We discovered these users as a part of this tool. Next is the completed count. This gives you the count of the mailboxes that were already migrated as a part of this batch. Finally, the active count. The active count gives you the sense of who are the set of users that are being currently migrated. You also have a link there. If I click on this link, we'll open up and show you the set of users that are being migrated, the items that are migrated, number of items, and when the migration started. You can also get the error count, the set of users that have failed and that are not migrating. In this case, we have 2 of them that have failed, and the reasons why they failed. And I'll walk through some of the common errors that you will encounter during migration in the troubleshooting section. Okay. You can also get the similar details as I mentioned through Get Migration Batch. And these are some of the same status information that are in the display. You can get them here as well. And similarly, Get Migration Status. Okay. Now, when initial sync is done, when your migration is complete, your tenant admin will get a report, or the one with the notification where I said, send email to rampo@microsoft.com. I will get a notification. The notification email contains few statistics, amount of time it took to migrate, who kicked off the migration, when was it started by, how many were completed. So it gives an overall data about the migration. It also has got a link here. The link is going to give you more statistics about the migration. If you click on the link, you can download this CSV file. The CSV file has got 6 columns. The email address and object, and finally the password. This password is what the migration service sets for all these users that are migrated to the cloud. The onus is on the tenant admin to distribute these passwords to his users. So he has to go and distribute these passwords to individual users. And the status says things like whether it was completed successfully or was it partially completed. It is partially completed when certain items are skipped. And I'll talk about skipped items. And items migrated and skipped are the items that were migrated, count, and skipped items. Now, during the troubleshooting section, I'll talk about why items are skipped and what are the 2 most common reasons that I have seen items being skipped for customers. At this point, initial sync is done, data has been copied, the tenant admin has got a report. Now, the tenant admin typically is mostly going to a few of the users, trying to get a sense of, hey, how was the migration? Asking those users to log into their Office 365 account and seeing if the migration data has been migrated and so on. During this phase, we copy data over, the Delta data over to the cloud every 24 hours. So if you had additional emails, we copy them at a 24-hour interval. This phase is what we call incremental sync. And once the tenant admin is comfortable with the migration, he, at this point, switches the MX record over. Until now, your mail was flowing to your on-premise organization. Your users were connected to your on-premise organization. But at this point, when the MX record has been switched over and you're done, your mail goes to Exchange Online. At this point, you need to work with your users to move them over to Office 365. So this point, at the end of incremental sync, where everything is done, you ask the users to move over to Office 365. For the tenant admin, the migration is still not done. There is one more final step. It's called the completion of migration. So you need to go back to the nav dashboard and click on complete migration. The complete migration calls a complete migration commandlet underneath that copies the data one more time. This one more time ensures that no data is left behind on premise. So this is just one sync, and then we clean up all the objects. So at this point, you can decommission your source, and you can be done. So summarize. So we looked at cutover exchange migration and the various phases. The cutover exchange migration, you had to do what you had to do in the various phases of cutover exchange migration. Now we'll spend some time looking at stage exchange migration. And at points, I'll call out how stage exchange migration differs from cutover exchange migration. The stage exchange migration has got is for medium to small size organizations. It's medium to large size organizations. And we support migrating from Exchange 2003 and Exchange 2007 server. If you have deployed 2010 already, we would recommend you do hybrid migration because you most probably are already 2/3 on the way. Stage migration supports migrating in batches. So you can have multiple batches, but each one of these are sequentially migrated. Stage migration, like cutover, is a high fidelity migration. We use the same migration tool and everything underneath. The only difference being that the migration flow is different. Stage migration is dependent on directory sync for provisioning. If you remember in cutover, the provisioning was done by the migration tool. In stage, we expect you to install DirSync up ahead and ensure that all the MUs are provisioned in the cloud. Once they are all done, I would recommend you kick off the stage migration and migrate in phases as and when you need. In the interest of time, I'm going to jump into the migrate phase for stage migration. The only difference between cutover and stage in the preparation phase is you need to install DirSync, and you have to activate DirSync. That's one step you need to do. The migration phase for DirSync, stage migration, is got 4 phases, 2 of which are driven by the tenant admin, and 2 of which are driven by the migration service. Now let's look at this. As in cutover, you go back to the same navigation dashboard, click on New, and choose the same option. Enter your on-premise credentials. We call, again, test migration server availability. And then we ask you to upload a CSV. This is different. This is the difference between stage and cutover, where cutover, we said we'll discover the users. In stage, we don't know which users you want to migrate. So you have to tell us which users you want to migrate. The CSV file has got 3 columns. The email address is the set of users. It's a target email address in the cloud. These are the set of users you want to migrate. The password. The password is the password you want to set for these users, because at the end of migration, you need to tell your users what the password is. You only specify the password if it is managed users. So if it is single sign-on, do not specify the password, because passwords are managed on premises. And the third option is, do you want to force changing of these passwords? Once you specify upload the CSV, you can kick off the migration in a very similar manner. However, notice at this point, mail is flowing to your on-premise organization. The clients are still connected there. Now, to start migration, click on Run. Till now, everything is same. You click on Run, and we start. The difference comes here. Notice this difference. The mail that is flowing to on-premise now gets forwarded to our cloud. It's redirected to the cloud. It's not sent to on-premise anymore. At the start of the migration, it gets redirected. So at this point, and we start copying over the mail in initial sync. So at this point, you need to work with your users to move them over to the cloud. This is in initial sync. You ask your users to move over to the cloud. This is the big difference between cutover and staged. Your data will come slowly trickling in as the migration completes. Once initial sync is done, you will get you can monitor initial sync in a similar way as in cutover. All these things are same. You will get a report at the end of your migration. And when you're done, you can call complete migration. The difference here is you can kick off new migration batches multiple times and keep doing migration. And then when you're done with all of them, call complete migration. There is no incremental sync. Then there is no need for, because once you kick off initial sync, mail starts flowing to the cloud. And once mail starts flowing to the cloud, there is no mail on-premise. So there is no need for getting the delta over. Okay? Now let's spend a few minutes looking at the data copy algorithm. Understanding these data copy algorithm can help you troubleshoot some of the problems that you might encounter, or at least understand the characteristics. There are two phases of data copy. First is initial sync, and second is incremental sync. In initial sync, we create the target mailbox, and then create these folders. We create these special folders and then other folders. So first phase of the migration is we create the whole folder structure. And then we start copying the data over. And we start copying the data from this set of special folders. First we do the contacts, then the calendars, then tasks, then notes, and then inbox and sent items, and then other folders, user-created folders. And in each of these folders, we start from the latest item to the oldest one. That's the initial sync phase. Now we have an incremental sync phase. In the incremental sync, we copy over the delta. So for example, in this case, say I received an email, I created a task, and I sent an email. And then I deleted my others folder. Now, in 24 hours, we will copy the delta content, and then we'll delete the folder that you deleted. So we'll also be able to synchronize all the changes. Okay, that's what we do in the incremental sync phase. Now I'll take questions at the end. All right, thank you. Now the troubleshooting tips. Let's spend some time looking at what are the common problems that you might encounter during migration. And I classify these in 3 broad categories. I'm going to spend some time looking at performance issues. These are common questions I've had, and I'm going to address them up ahead. Second, I see people encounter connectivity issues, and I want to talk about how to troubleshoot some of these connectivity issues. And finally, the common question is, why are these content not migrated? And I want to try answering and trying to rationalize that as well. So these are 3 things we want to talk about. First is performance. Well, common questions I've had customers ask me is, why is my migration so slow? What is the throughput I can get from these tools? So those are 2 questions that I see all the time. Well, it's really hard to give you one answer. And the reason being is it depends on so many factors. The first thing we need to note is, what are the limiting factors? What will affect the migration throughput? Well, the first one is your source server CPUs can affect it. your memory can affect, your source server memory, disk length, and network latency, and bandwidth. So these are limiting factors that can affect your migration throughput. You have to monitor these factors when you're doing your test migration and see what kind of throughput you can get, and see if it's getting it affect your source servers. You have one knob that you can adjust your migration rate. It's called the max concurrent migrations. If you remember, when I kicked off the migrations, there was this configuration setting that I wanted you to note. And that's the knob you can change it from default 3 to all the way up to 10. So that means that default we concurrently migrate 3 mailboxes, and at 10 we concurrently migrate 10 mailboxes. So how do you migrate these? How do you monitor these knobs? So here are some performance counters for your reference. I added these for your reference. So make sure that your source server CPUs are not too pegged. Make sure your disk length is like 1 or 2, 0 or 1. Make sure that your net latency is not high. You can't really control latency, but at least observe and be knowledgeable that this is a latency is high and that it's going to affect the migration throughput. So at least you are informed. You can use the Outlook connection status tool to measure the latency that you'll experience. So basically, connect your admin account, say, to the admin account in Office 365. You configure your Outlook to connect to that, and then see your connection status tool. Open your connection status tool. So here are some tools that you can use to identify the performance. However, monitoring all this, if you see that your performance is not impacted, go ahead and increase your concurrent migrations. But however, if you do see that your performance is impacted, then I would recommend that you load balance on the source side. So how do you load balance on the source side? Well, in cutover, I don't expect you to, because I expect it to be for small organizations. But in Stage, if you have multiple source servers, then prepare your CSV such that the mailboxes are in these multiple Exchange source servers. And so we automatically go pick these users from these source servers. So you can do there are some tricks here that you can leverage. The next scenario I want to walk through is connectivity scenarios. So this is my project on a weekend. I said, hey, what are the connectivity issues and how can I recover from this? And so I broke my source Exchange server and tried to kick off a migration. And when I kicked off, entered my credentials and pressed next, I got this error message. The error message here tells me to go use testexchangeconnectivity.com. Test Exchange Connectivity is a tool that it's a web-based tool, and it's been out there for a very long time, and people use it to troubleshoot connectivity problems with their on-premises Exchange server. So I'm using the same tool to troubleshoot my migration connectivity issues. So I navigate to testexchangeconnectivity.com and pick the Outlook Anywhere option and kick off the connectivity analyzer. I was asked to enter some credentials. I entered all these credentials, run the connectivity analyzer, and then up pops a report. The report has got everything is red, everything is broken. So I'm worried. But I look at the report and I see that my auto-discover services fail. So I navigate back to my on-premise server and get my Outlook Anywhere configuration and look at what's wrong. It turns out that my external host name was wrong. I had previously had exmig5, but I changed the domain name to scmmigration.info, which is the domain that we've just migrated. And so I had to go fix my Outlook Anywhere service back to SCM migration. So I did the set and get and made sure it was all right, and then went back to my tool and reran the test. I got 2 greens. That was good. But however, I still have a red. It turns out my SSL certificate, something is invalid. So I went back to my source server again and got my Exchange certificate. And I was looking at it, and I found that it's the same issue, where I don't have scmmigration.info domain or autodiscover.scmmigration.info in my certified domains. So I need to get a certificate with those domains in them, the domains that are the accepted domains I'm migrating from. So I go get a new Exchange certificate, and I go to Microsoft Certificate Authority, get a certificate issued, import the certificate, enable it, and then rerun this tool again. And at this point, I get more greens and still one red. However, this is SSL mutual auth, and if mutual auth fails, I do not need to enable mutual auth for migration to succeed. So at this point, I went ahead and kicked off my migration, and I was successful. So I've used Test Exchange connectivity to troubleshoot some of these migration connectivity issues. So I would recommend you to use it all the way in the validation phase. In the preparation phase itself, try getting through these hurdles. The next common issue I've seen customers encounter is this failure called fail to update the on-premises mailbox with target address. This is an error message they get after they have kicked off the migration and it's done its initial sync. And it can take several hours to get this error. But this error means that you're trying to migrate from Exchange 2010 using staged Exchange migration. We do not support stage Exchange migration. We recommend you use hybrid deployment for migrating from Exchange 2010. This is not the best of the error messages, so we're working to improve it. So if somebody is going to try this before that, I want to warn you that this is what you will get. Okay. Finally, let's look at the scenarios of why was my item skipped. If you remember, we had this report at the end of initial sync, which told you which items were skipped. Now, there are two reasons I've seen items being skipped. One is large items. If your mail is larger than 25 megabytes, we drop your item. So we skip the large item and increase the skipped item count. The next reason why we skipped items is bad item. If we cannot read your source mailbox item, then we don't migrate them and we increment the skipped count to 1. So these are the two common reasons why we have seen that items are skipped. Unfortunately, at this point, we don't have a mechanism to tell you which are those items. So, however, we are working in the GA plus time frame to get you that. So there are two commandlets we are introducing called the get MIG user and get MIG user statistics to tell you what are the items that were skipped and why they were skipped and how to locate them. It will give you something like the item subject name, the parent folder, the date, and those kind of data so that you can work with your users and tell them, hey, you know what, these are skipped, this is why, please go either manually migrate or save this content. We are working on that. Okay. Finally, if you see internal error in your report, there are 3 reasons why I've seen this happen. During migration, you may have deleted some of your users. And if you did delete them after initial sync, you will get an internal error in this report. So I would recommend don't delete these users, or if you do delete, then be aware of the fact that you deleted the user. We are again trying to improve the error message here as well so that it's obvious. The next one is, if you still get an internal error and you have not deleted the user, I would recommend you retry migration. It may have been some kind of transient failure. And so I would recommend you retry. And if it still persists, I would ask you to contact support. Internal errors need investigation, and we would investigate it for you. So please do contact support. I have an alert on my mail, so I think I need to check this alert. Just give me a moment. So this alert is about the fact that our migration has finished. So we've done our initial sync. Gentlemen, we have migrated all the mailboxes to Office 365 live in this demo. So let's open this report. If you see this report, you can see that we have migrated right now. It took us 13 minutes to kick off this finish this migration. It's done 10 mailboxes, groups, and a contact. And we have a report here. If I click on this report, I'm going to open, it's opening it. So we have migrated 10 of these users. Here's the number of items we migrate. We didn't skip any. Everything was successful. And here are the passwords. So this is a live migration. There were 20 other migrations that were going on. We finished in 30 minutes during this talk. So it's as simple as that. So migrations are not that complicated. It just requires a little bit of preparation. Okay. Now, steps we need to take post-migration. So till now, we looked at all the admin user experiences. What does the admin need to be aware of? What does he need to do? Now, let's look at what the end user needs to do in your organization. First, he's not going to get any update in Outlook. There may be a mail from the admin asking him to move to Office 365, but that's something he needs to do. There is no change in user experience. So once he gets that notification in some manner from the admin, he goes and logs in, signs in into Office 365, resets his password, the temporary password that he was given. He goes and resets it, and then downloads this tool called the connector. The connector patches your Office applications, including Outlook, so that it can connect to Office 365. Once it connects to Office, we download Outlook. And once he installs connector, he needs to recreate he needs to create a new profile and resync all the content. Once that's done, we need to do certain fixes. Certain aspects are broken or require fixing from the IW after migration. Things like Outlook rules, client-side rules, RSS feeds, client-side search folders, and quick steps may require fixing. So for example, in this case, this rule is broken, and it appears in red in this way. So the fix is click on Change Rule and update the specified folder. A rule is typically broken whenever it references a folder ID, and a folder ID after migration changes because we are doing copy of the data, and so you will need to fix those rules because of that. That's the general principle underneath. Once you're done with that migration. So let's spend a few minutes looking at what is and what isn't migrated. Well, we do not migrate security groups. It's not part of the migration. We ask you to go create the security groups by navigating to the admin Office 365 portal and create security groups. We don't migrate dynamic distribution groups. Dynamic distribution groups can be created through PowerShell through a new dynamic distribution group commandlet. We don't migrate dumpsters. Dumpster 1.0 can also be created. Dumpster 1.0 we do not migrate. And we do not migrate send as permissions as well. So these are the few things that we do not migrate. However, we migrate a lot of things. Here are a few examples. We migrate tasks. We migrate contacts. We migrate email, of course. We migrate calendar. We migrate notes. And we migrate delegate send as, delegate permissions. We migrate OOF messages. And we even migrate distribution groups. And we migrate server-side rules as well. Okay? So welcome to Office 365. And thank you for attending my talk. All right. Yeah, go ahead. You can use the mic.
Yeah, so when you said that you migrate delegates, how about if you have one user that gets migrated to Office 365 and the other user still on premise?
Yeah,
that's
so
broken, right?
It'll be broken. So you will recommend you migrate them together.
do you offer any tool to identify accounts that have delegates so that you can identify those users, because we don't control that. These are the users adding delegates.
Not as a part of this tool, we do not offer a mechanism to identify that. It's the expectation is on, the onus is on the admin at this point.
So I have a quick question. Actually, I have two questions. One is, so you were showing a lot of the commandlets that were associated with some of the migration. You didn't show any of the commandlets associated with moving, actually syncing the mailbox data. I was wondering what commandlets were associated with that.
So I showed the commandlets that a tenant admin has access to. The commandlets that were is for syncing the data is called a new merge request. It's similar to new move request. If you're familiar with the move request model,
Yeah.
we use MRS underneath the covers, but it's not available to the tenant admin. So the expectation is the onus is not on the tenant admin to kick off this. They act at the scope of the batch. So you just kick off the migrations of the batch, and we'll take care of ensuring that the data move happens. So you don't need to monitor those.
Okay. And then my other question is there actually a maximum bad item limit before a mailbox won't be moved?
The maximum bad limit is unlimited.
It is unlimited. Okay.
I had a question
Go ahead.
over here.
Go ahead, please.
I didn't see you. Is there ever going to be a time that you think where you will not have to re-download the OST file after you upload your mailbox? I would think that would be a limiting factor for some people.
So my next priority is fixing the end user experience. If you see the fact that the end user needs to go fix the folder IDs, fix the rules and RSS feeds and so on. So that's what we are focusing on. OST resyncs will still need to be done because we do item copy and the ID is not retained. So when you have a profile, the profile can be only reused when the item ID is retained on. So you need a move kind of semantics, not a merge kind of semantics. So I don't expect that to happen in the next 1.5 years. Use hybrid deployment if you didn't want to resync your OST.
Okay, thanks.
Go ahead.
Something you didn't address is in an environment where they use public folders within Outlook, is that something that is migrated as well, or is that, how do you guys handle that on
So
the back end? Because it's in Outlook. You see that the end user sees it in Outlook, but obviously it doesn't look like those would be seen on the Office 365.
Yeah, so we don't support public folder migrations.
Okay, and in the environment with Office 2007, 2010, they can have multiple profiles. One can be a Exchange server, another one can be a Hotmail profile. Can you migrate both?
Hotmail profile?
Yeah, they use Hotmail. And in other words, they want to move it up to the Office 365.
So Hotmail is a special case. But if you're talking about IMAP servers, we can do IMAP servers as well, migration.
So in other words, moving them from a Hotmail profile to another, to an Exchange profile, no problem.
If you are moving from, when you mean that the user is using Hotmail,
Right.
you want them to move to Exchange, we don't have a solution in this tool. This tool is from migrating from Exchange to Office 365. We can move from IMAP to Office 365.
Okay.
We don't provide any Hotmail migration solutions
Okay,
as a part of this tool.
okay, thank you.
I've got a question. Is it possible to migrate or provision users without actually migrating their mailbox data? Like
Not with this tool.
Basically, you want to move the users and have them out there in 365, but
There is a mechanism.
blank box.
There is a mechanism in directory sync. I think Joan or Luke touched on that topic in the talk yesterday. Did you guys have a chance to? So I would recommend you look at that topic. There is a mechanism. You kick off DirSync and then run a commandlet or do something on premise to create these mailboxes.
Okay. And my second question is how close are the pages that you demoed and the process? How close is that to the Office 365 for education?
The migration tool is very similar, and it's the same irrespective of what offering it is. So it'll be the same.
Okay, so when we're, what I guess Microsoft Live or 365 for Education saying that it's going to be very similar to what you just went through here.
Correct. It's the same. It's the same tools.
All right, great.
Question.
Go ahead.
You mentioned that you create new profiles for the user. So could you maintain somehow PST file links?
The user, so it's on the user to create a new profile. We do not create a new profile. What was the second part of the question?
The PST files a user might have.
So he needs to import the UPST file.
Okay.
Just a quick question. Your tool goes to Office 365. If there's a change in policy, does the tool also migrate backwards to Exchange?
Sorry, I can't hear you very clearly. Can you be louder?
Your tool migrates to Office 365. Will it go backwards too if needed be?
No, there is no offboarding solution. So offboarding solution, you need to use hybrid tools. So for piloting, for example, in Staged, we'll ask you to use test mailboxes. In Cutover, as long as you haven't switched to MX record over, you can just migrate your whole org if you're a small size org and ask some of your users to go log into Office 365 to get a feel of the experience. Of course, mail flow will not work, so you won't be able to operate in a full-fledged manner, but that's where we are.
A question?
What's the message size limit in Office 365? Is it 25 meg based on your move?
So currently it's 25. There is something that we are looking to increase it to 35 megs, but it might go up to 35.
Question on namespace. How, maybe you touched it briefly, I may have not heard. How do you, I understand how you change your MX record for the entire domain, right, to go to Office, but what if you have, or you already have a situation where you have a shared namespace within your organization? How do you then transition individual users over to Office 365?
So I assume at this point you're alluding to the fact that you want to do stage migration. I suspect your org is not too big. If it is large size orgs, I would recommend use hybrid. If it's not too big, and if you are thinking of migrating within a few weeks to the cloud, then you can use Stage. And in Stage, we will redirect mail back to the cloud by forwarding. We set something called target address on-premise that enables you to move to the cloud.
So when you do the target, it arrives at the mailbox, and then it then forwards it on?
Yes, but it's never stored in the mailbox.
Gotcha. So it's not like a copy?
It's not a store and forward.
Okay.
It's a redirect.
But
Correct.
the mailbox still resides while, on premise.
Correct. There is a mailbox on premise, but we do store and forward at that time. We are also looking at the possibility of creating a script for converting these mailboxes to MEUs. And if you can do that, then you're in a better state because things like FreeBSD may start working as well. So, but since it's a 2-week time frame, it's not worth a lot of these investments.
Hi. Journaling. So how is that impacted when you have a staged approach?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
As far as enterprise journaling, if I'm journaling and I want to move users using this tool in a stage or phase approach.
Journaling?
Yeah.
Do we migrate journaling content?
So so if I move the user, they're not going to get journaled, right?
Yeah, so I don't know the impact of this. I don't know the answer to this question. I can find out and let you know. You probably have to create a new journal rule in Office 365. Okay, cool. Any more questions? All right. Thank you very much. Please do complete the evals, and thank you.